Now joining us from Harvard University. His book is This Time is Different, of course, with Carmen Rogoff, Cabot Professor at Harvard University, Ken Rogoff. The president wrote about you tonight. He said, a critical tool for accelerating that shift is greater flexibility in exchange rates. The euro is inflexible. Is it a failed program?
I think the euro is half-baked and needs to be either completely baked or not work. I think they have to move forward, and that's something that's missing here. I mean, they sort of have a temporary bailout, buying, I think, just a while, a few months, maybe even, but they haven't really laid out how they're going to keep moving forward.
The how of the plan, the action of the plan here.
Fiscal union. I mean, why would you have different regulatory authorities in Europe when you're going to have one central bank bailing everybody out? There's a lot of pieces missing.
The hallmark of This Time is Different, to compress 500 wonderful 10 years in the making research pages, is 90% is the trip point. You say we will see something in a number of months. Is it just as simple as getting these silly measurements of 120% of GDP down to that 90% mark?
Well, the 90% mark refers to levels advanced countries reach, and then it's
Greece is not an advanced country.
Greece, I would not put it yet being an advanced country. It might be in the process, but it is definitely not there yet. And for emerging markets, the threshold for external debt is much, much lower than what Greece has of getting into trouble.
Your perspective, and you've written so much on China over the years. I remember one of your IMF monographs from years ago, not obtuse, but just very sophisticated work. Will the Chinese step up here and fund partially or completely this bailout?
Well, you know, look, who knows what they were doing with their reserves before, but we certainly think they were diversifying. And when the euro crisis came up, they slowed down their diversification. That was probably something that put pressure. Maybe they'll resume their diversification. They're happy to hold German bonds. The question is how much Italian, Greek, Portuguese, Irish debt. And frankly, if you look at historical experience, when countries owe external creditors, the thresholds are lower than on domestic debt because there's less you can do to the external creditors. So I don't see China coming in as being any long-term solution.
Have you advised the Chinese government here? Have they called 1-800-ROGOFF?
I have not advised the Chinese government here, although I did, talk to them over the years about why they held so many of their reserves in dollars.
Our Michael McKee has made it, and I'll talk about this later, this idea of in July, I believe it was, we saw the euphoria of an equity market, and then over we go again. The behavior of today, was it typical from your research with Carmen Reinhart?
Well, I can't quite appeal to that necessarily. It's just watching the history of this euro crisis where, you know, when they get to midnight and the markets find out 4 a.m., next time it'll be 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. And by the way, there are only 24 hours in the day. It'll run out. But
they'll change that.
Europe will have a new clock so they can negotiate long enough. But I mean, the markets are so relieved that it's not over today, that they're worried about that I don't think they're looking very far down the road. I think that there's a heck of a lot, not just of unanswered questions, of unasked questions in this.
This would be the dithering that seems to be the theme. I'm going to call it the dithering Davos. My theme today is, what does this mean for America? If you could explain to our viewers that haven't taken Ec 10 with ManQ and the other advantages of being in economics, what does this breakthrough today mean for the United States?
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, I think if you looked at why the United States isn't growing even faster than it is, you know, why has the growth been so exceptionally slow, particularly over the summer? Certainly fear about the euro, the catastrophe, Lehman too, that's been a big factor. A lot of people say, well, is it because our banks hold a lot of European debt? Is it because we trade a lot with Europe? If only that were the whole issue. If Europe is a huge part of the global economy, it's comparable to the United States. If Europe had a meltdown, it's going to affect us in so many ways you can't imagine it, just as the Europeans didn't realize what our problems would do.
People have made note of the sharp difference in the International Monetary Fund, where you served as economic counselor and chief economist, between Dominique Strauss-Kahn's tenure and what we've seen initially from Madame Lagarde. Have you been pleased with Madame Lagarde's performance, and is she representing the interests of major funders, including the United States?
Well, I certainly think I give her a lot of points for what she said about needing bank recapitalization over the summer in Europe. It was really the first time that out in public the IMF had so glaringly disagreed with the Europeans' estimates. I think Dominique Strauss-Kahn had actually been very tough behind the scenes, but then out in public, whatever plan they said, he said, plan number 10 is just as wonderful as plans number 7, 8, and 9, and we think this one will do it finally.
Right.
And I mean, Christine Lagarde has to say the same thing, but I thought that was very good. They have not given enough tough love to Europe. It remains to be seen. It is early days. I do not think this was the end. I think we're in an escalating crisis. We are seeing escalating policy reactions. They are still not ahead of things.
I'm going to rip up the script here and go right to the U.S. experiment, a super committee meeting now. You've been one of the most vocal critics, along with your colleague Martin Feldstein, about our nation's deficit, dovetailing on this European crisis, which you're so cautious on a better outlook. What would you recommend now to Washington to jumpstart to a more constructive 2012?
Well, I thought the Bowles-Simpson Commission was fantastic. I mean, improving our tax system.
What happened there, Ken Rogoff?
I wish I could tell you, because it was really one of the best pieces of work that I've seen come out of Washington in a long time, basically broadening the tax base, reducing exemptions, keeping rates low. I mean, that's the fundamental thing that we need to keep our eye on. I mean, even a flat tax, is an extreme version of that, but even if it's less extreme, I'm concerned that the super committee will agree with each other, but not actually be able to get anything through Congress.
And to bring it finally back to Europe, we look at this amazing day, but one of many days on our path. What would you like Merkel and Sarkozy to do now? What is the Rogoff to-do list as we just get to the end of this month?
Well, I think the most important thing on the to-do list is to give us a vision of where we're going with this whole thing. It's very clear the euro as constituted does not work. It needs to move forward. This isn't news to these people, but they thought they had 20 years and 40 years. They need to move much faster.
Right.
What constitutional changes there are going to be. They need to give us a vision of why this is worth doing.
Very good. Ken Rogoff, thank you so much.